explosion leads to a huge fire overnight and a home destroyed. It happened on Walter Street near Martin Luther King Boulevard.
We need her to stay on this side.
Okay. Was there anybody in there?
Yes,
Oh,
two.
We had two people get out. We had two people come out, a man and a lady.
Oh, thank
They're over
God.
here.
Thank God.
This case started when a normal person is trying to do a very normal thing, just make dinner. And then all of a sudden, an explosion happening that literally blows the roof off your home, crashes you to the floor. The next thing you know, you've got bits and pieces of the ceiling and the roof on you, and you're on fire. You wonder what's happened, if you can think through the pain, and then you wonder, where's my mom?
And the house that they were living in at the time did explode due to a gas line leak. And Robert was at one hospital, my mom was at another. The events of everything were overwhelming.
Pauline is the sister of Robert Rymers. She is the daughter of Virginia Rymers.
These people were intellectually disabled to begin with. Robert had an IQ of about 59. His mother had an IQ of less than that. She was nonverbal. So it was a case of just tremendous pain and horror for anyone.
Robert was severely burnt. He spent a whole entire month in the hospital. And my mom had carbon monoxide poisoning. She had to have some hyperbaric testing, treatment. I was the one that she went home with. She was homeless, so you take care of your family.
Robert lost his dignity. He was no longer able to take care of himself. And really, after all that happened, they lost their hope.
My mom and my brother lost their whole life. That fire, everything that they had as far as pictures of my grandparents, pictures of our childhood, personal things, everything was completely gone. And so thinking about that and thinking how unfair it was to my mom and my brother, that's when I decided to take action, because what happened to them shouldn't happen to anybody else. And making sure that there was a voice for them, somebody that was going to be, on their side, somebody that was going to take care of them, and just help them along the process.
When we received this case, the home had already been destroyed and carried away by the city of San Antonio. So the first part of the mystery of why this happened was, how could it have happened? It eventually led to the company that was the only defendant at trial in this case, CPS Energy, which supplies all of the gas to all of the businesses, all of the residents, and all of the citizens in that community.
We knew, based on circumstantial evidence and direct evidence through certain witness accounts, that natural gas was the fuel source. You had the physical characteristics of an explosion that show natural gas was the likely fuel. You had the artifacts in the sense of the roof blowing off the house, debris scattered for hundreds of yards in any direction, okay? You had injuries to both of our clients that were consistent with a vapor, right? So a diffuse vapor, unseated explosion, which would explain why there were burns both on the front side and the back side of our client. So you had all of those things, but because the structure was leveled and experts were not able to come in and test it to see exactly how the natural gas may have, entered the space, then we had challenges, to say the least.
You have an explosion that happens in the cover of darkness just before 11 o'clock at night. You have two people with intellectual disabilities who have been taken to a burn unit in San Antonio, Brooke Army Medical Center. So they're no longer present at their home. Gas company comes out and conducts their investigation. This is probably the biggest challenge that we faced. Was the gas company did not do what they are required to do under their own policies and procedures. The meter to this house was shut off 6 months before this explosion occurred. So many people looked at that as a challenge and said, there's no gas coming through the meter into the gas system for the house. How could there be gas inside the house?
A good trial lawyer sees things coming years in advance. And if I could compliment our team and our side on anything in this case, it's that there were no surprises at trial. So we start, and I start very early on, trying to figure out what the challenges are going to be in the case. Here in this case, how did the gas get into the house? Okay, what witnesses do I need to find that may have one small factual detail that's really important? What expert witnesses do I need to find that have expertise specific to that issue that the jury can listen to, can understand, and ultimately will believe because they're right? We have to serve our clients, we have to make sure that justice is done, and we want to leave it on the field.
Our firm has a very strict regimen of how we ready cases for trial. And it's a little bit brutal, but it works. We typically like to focus group cases at least a couple of times. We try to touch and feel every piece of paper, every witness, every photograph. And we want to do that and workshop it long before we get to the courthouse. And so that process starts in earnest a couple months before trial at least. You know, another thing that we do is we really start thinking about early on is, what do my trial demonstratives look like? How am I going to show the jury in this case that this house exploded? We had camera rolls from news agencies that had come out. This was all over the news when it happened. We had that. We had what first responders had captured with their body cams. And then we had what was in the documented evidence from fire and police reports. And so we took all of that and we went to a really good animator over in Los Angeles and had them put that together. I tell people all the time, it's not that you're going to win a case in voir dire, but you sure can lose it. Robert Hirschhorn comes to help pick the jury, who's the best. He's phenomenal. And he goes, hang on a second. Robert's so sharp. And he goes through all of it and he looks at it and he goes, we need a shuffle. It paid off because it changed the composition, the demography of that panel greatly. I was on my feet conducting jury selection that day from 9 o'clock in the morning until 10:30 at night. We didn't actually seat a jury until 10:30 that night. The other side brought up maybe 40 jurors for cause or trying to rehabilitate people that should be struck for cause. And it was frustrating at the time, but I'll give the court credit. She was even-handed with letting people put their cases on. I really liked our jury.
The judge kind of gave us a hard and fast on, how long we could go. So we have to streamline everything to where we get the biggest bang for our buck. We've got to capitalize on what we think is the most important so that we get that across to the jury. And I think our team did a fantastic job of that.
Chris did openings. There was a lot of discussion about how we were going to do opening. There was a lot of discussion about whether we were going to be able to use the animation. Of course, we were able to do that. And I felt like Chris was really concise. He told a good story.
I had the privilege of doing the opening statement, and opening statements are they're a challenge because you can be restricted in what you say. The jury hasn't heard any evidence at that point, so you have to be methodical and very intentional on what you reveal and how you reveal it to them. But it's also one of my favorite parts of a trial because it allows you to be the voice for your client at the very beginning that sets the stage for the jury. You get an opportunity to tell them what you're going to show them. You get an opportunity to make certain promises to them, and you get to spend the remaining weeks of trial fulfilling the promises and making good on the statements you make to the jury at the open.
By the time Chris had gotten to his opening and was kind of rolling through towards the end. Pauline Rymers is sitting to my left, and Chris starts showing the video of the first responders' encounter with Pauline's mother, Virginia. And it really was not planned this way. But as Pauline, she'd never seen any of this footage, she starts seeing her mother distraught, not knowing what's going on. She knows what her mom's capabilities are. And there's a first responder saying, I found this woman, but he doesn't understand why she's unable to tell him what her name is. And Pauline becomes very emotional.
Watching the videos, I felt so bad. Watching my mom run around the neighborhood looking for Robert, wondering what happened. She was looking for a familiar face.
This is all building and happening in real time while Chris is telling the story. And so she's tears rolling down her face. And at the exact moment that that's happening, Chris turns and says, and this is Pauline Rymers, and I'd like to introduce you to her. She's been taking care of her brother and her mother, and she'll be in the courtroom and probably testify in this case. And so the jury's shifting their focus to her, and like, here she is, totally distraught. And so it was high drama, and Chris did a good job with that. I think it set the tone, but we had a lot of roadblocks and a lot of hurdles to overcome to get to the ultimate result. I think the opening really kicked it off in a good way. The very first witnesses were two people who had never been deposed in the case, which were neighbors, the Sosa family. And the defendants didn't know what they were going to say. But what was most important about their testimony, and no one had heard, was when we went to go talk to them, they had indicated that when they walked outside, immediately they saw the meter on fire. And there was some split in, opinion about the timing of when that happened. If the meter was on fire immediately, there's a really good argument that maybe the meter was the source of the fire. The landlord, Ernestina Escada, who was a 75-year-old widow, she testified that on the date in question, she gets there in the afternoon and she smells gas. She smells it coming from the crawl space, and she smells it when she knocks on Robert Rymers' door, coming out of his apartment when he opens the door. I think the gas company thought, well, we'll convince the jury that this was not natural gas, but if they think it's natural gas, shouldn't you blame Ernestina Escada? What I think a reasonable interpretation of her actions is, she knows that the gas had been shut off in November of 2020. She knows that there are no gas appliances in the house. She testified at trial that she was concerned. She checked on these folks from time to time, and she was so concerned that she decided she would spend the night. And so she slept on the other side of the house, and her plan was that if she continued to smell gas the next day, she was going to call somebody. Well, the house blew up. Things got a little bit wonky when we had to put on our industry expert. We weren't sure if he was going to be able to handle the cross-examination that was coming. And so Chris Carr and Chris Simmons made a strategic decision that I agreed with, which was to cut it way down and make it really simplified. And he did fine. He was great. He testified that their failure to have proper maintenance protocols for the service lines and meter setup is below the standard of care. He testified that they weren't properly training and supervising their people. Chris Carr put on Eric Van Itterstein. He conducted all the testing on the artifacts of the meter setup and the gas utility system, and testified that the valve just below the meter leaked when we tested it. And I thought he was credible. He conceded in the areas where he had to, but he also did a really good job of holding his own in the areas that he felt strongly about, which was that there is direct evidence that this thing leaked. And I thought their lawyer did a good job of cross-examining him on, can you tell us about what the intensity of this leak would have been? And they were basically doing some back of the napkin math with that to say, well, based on the intensity level that you can identify, that's not enough gas to blow this house up. And the response to that is, well, you're assuming that's the only leak, because there was evidence of other leaks. And there was parts of the gas system that weren't recovered. And then turn the page, they put their case on, and they came after us full tilt. They put Mike Fuentes up first, who was their corporate designee. And Fuentes was also the guy who conducted the investigation for the company. And I think they regretted that from word go. It did not go well for him. The cross-examination of him was essentially, here are all the things that you're supposed to do, which he admitted, and then he had to concede that they didn't do any of them. And then after he testified, they brought out Quentin Baker. And to set the stage, Mr. Baker is a mechanical engineer. He's also an origin and cause expert. He's kind of a jack of all trades. They had him as their metallurgical engineer. They had him as their mechanical engineer. He did all the testing on the artifacts. He was the one that did the origin and cause analysis. So their eggs were kind of in one basket. And they put him on the stand all day. And as excited as we were after we rested, we were sitting around at lunch eating sandwiches going, we got some problems, because if the jury believes everything he's saying, we're going to lose this case. He was that convincing. Makes a good witness. And I was feeling a lot of pressure. I told everybody I was feeling a lot of pressure because I was cross-examining him. And I'd made my mind up that I was just going to go after him hard.
The other side called a witness as an expert who was sort of a one-stop shop. He was going to solve all of their problems. My partner, Mike Lyons, cross-examined him and destroyed him. It's some of the best legal work I've seen in my career. That was a standout moment.
I kind of set up the rules of the road of like, you agree you're not supposed to be an advocate. You agree that you should be unbiased. You agree that you should review all the relevant materials. You agree that if a fact can be interpreted two different ways, you shouldn't just pick one. It's not your job to substitute your review of the facts and declare what the facts are. Your job is to be objective and not to do the job of the jury. And so we set all that up, and then I kind of demonstrated all the ways that he wasn't doing any of that. The fact of the matter is that he is an industry expert, that he makes millions of dollars from working for gas companies. He had testified 30 times in 30 different cases where the gas company's gas was alleged to have caused an injury or a death, and that he had consistently testified that it wasn't the gas company's gas or that the gas company didn't do anything wrong. The most satisfying part of the entire thing was when things were going really, really good, they stepped over the line. They took a piece of evidence, which was the valve that allegedly failed, which we said was installed in 1960. And Quentin Baker had taken a photograph and he had manipulated it in a way that it changed the characterization of the evidence. There's a stamp on the valve that says 12,008, and they shifted it around to make it look like it said 2008 and put it up on the overhead. And the lawyer for the gas company came over and said, "Is this a fair and accurate representation of the valve?" I jumped out of my chair, objected, went to the judge and said, "I know what he's about to do. If this witness testifies that that valve was made in 2008, he can't say that. There's no foundation for it. There's no evidence of it. But if you let him do it, I'm just telling the court, I'm asking that you give me the latitude to go after him on this because no one's ever said this." And we had talked to our own expert about it, and he had said, "I don't know what that number means, but it's not a date." So they did it. And Simmons, on the lunch break, went over and grabbed the valve and started physically looking at it. And he came over to me and he whispered in my ear and he said, "That valve clearly says 12,008 on it. It does not say 2008. And I said, "Okay, don't make a big deal. Don't say anything." I knew what I was going to do. So we came back when I was cross-examining him. I went and got the valve. I physically took the valve from him and I said, I looked at it and I made a big scene about it. And I said, "Your Honor, I want to mark this as Plaintiff's Exhibit 181. I want the jury to physically have this in the jury room so they can look and see what it actually says." And then I said, "Your Honor, I asked for permission to publish it to the jury." And I walked around to every juror and I said, and I had my back to the witness. I said, "Now, Mr. Baker, you've testified under oath that the valve says 2008, right?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "And you put this up on the overhead and you want the jury to believe that." And so I'm walking around. I said, "Now, the jury can make up their mind about what it actually says. It says 12,008. And in closing argument, I brought that up again. I said, "You're going to go back to the jury room. You're going to elect a foreman." We talked about that. And I said, "Here's the first thing I want you to do. I want you to ask the bailiff to get the valve. And I want you to look at it. And I want you to remember what they told you. They said that this valve was manufactured in 2008. They said that it says 2008 on it, and it doesn't. And that's a metaphor for their entire case. Every time you're wondering whether or not this is a gas explosion, I want you to remember that they lied to you about the valve. You know, a jury trial is a race to credibility. You don't get a second chance. And I think they lost a ton of momentum and credibility at that exact moment, and they never got it back. This guy got busted up over the next 6 hours. I mean, it was a bloodbath for that guy. And at the conclusion of the case, the jurors told us that they didn't believe anything that he said. So that went well for us. And so by the conclusion of his examination, I think the jury pretty much knew that this guy was just an industry expert who's going to show up and say whatever they pay him to say. And so I did what I call the jukebox cross-examination, which is I said, tell me, do you know what a jukebox is? Well, sure I know what a jukebox is. I'm like, well, we've got some younger jurors on this panel who may not know what a jukebox is. Will you tell them what a jukebox is? And so he says, well, it's a device that, it contains LPs, which are basically records, and you put money in the machine and then you can select whatever song you want to play. And so while he's doing this, I'm standing in front of the jury with the trusty easel and I'm drawing a picture of a jukebox. And I said, okay, so let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So you put the money right here in the slot, and I drew an arrow. And I said, and then you pay the money and it'll play whatever tune you want? And he said, that's right. And I said, you would agree with me, sir, that a testifying expert like yourself shouldn't behave like a jukebox, should it? And that was the last question I asked him. So we interviewed some jurors afterwards, and they all said, we knew what was coming, and he just didn't see it. We felt like we had a lot of momentum going into the damages part of the case. So we had connected the dots on liability, and we basically had 3 witnesses we wanted to put on.
What people don't really understand is that as bad as burn injuries are to your physical body, the toll they take on your mental side and your emotions is unbelievable. It was really powerful in the trial when we had 2 neuropsychologists testify. And I think the jury found it particularly impactful when both neuropsychologists, plaintiffs and defense, agreed that Robert's emotional injuries were the type that you would not wish on your worst enemy. And I'll be honest, it was one of the first trials, maybe the first trial, I've ever seen the opposing side's expert take the stand and admit that my client's injuries, from an emotional and mental standpoint, were life-altering and permanent.
I thought Chris Carr did a great job with Dr. Chan. And what he did was he very methodically laid out all of the different injuries that Robert had sustained. And we had actually worked with a medical illustrator to do illustrations of Robert's body. And they were actual renditions of Robert. They were to scale of his body and his injuries. And Dr. Chan worked with those. He didn't have to sensationalize anything. And I think the jury appreciated that. He was very matter of fact. Robert's going to need 32 surgeries over the next 10 years. Because when you take healthy tissue from your body and you graft it onto areas that have been burned, that skin no longer produces sweat. It no longer breathes. It will no longer grow. And so it creates metabolic problems for your body. It creates muscle wasting issues. Your biggest organ in your body is your skin, but it also creates contractures. And so what he described is that he needs 32 of those surgeries, and every time he has that surgery, it's going to be very painful. And what I told the jury in closing was he has a Sophie's choice. He doesn't want to have these surgeries, but he's eventually going to be so debilitated from his contractures that he won't be able to move at all. Or you can go have surgery, which will be painful and re-traumatize you every single time. So Chan was good, and then the crescendo to our case was Pauline Rymers, who was great. And it became the foundation of the closing argument in the case, which was that she was a hero.
I don't spend any days in the courtroom, so going in there, I was nervous. Chris and Mike made me feel comfortable. I saw the entire team, people that I hadn't even met, and everybody was just so sweet, so nice.
So then came the closing, and the judge gave us an hour and a half to do close. I said essentially that, if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is the core of the American dream. When you take away everybody's worldly possessions, you take their home, you take their pets, you take their independence, their dignity, and their hope, they've stripped them of their American dream. And, that's not something that should be cheapened, something that you should have to pay for if you do that. And they won't take any responsibility, and so that's why we have courthouses and juries. I can't get them to take responsibility. Maybe they will listen to you. A member of your community was blown up, burned, and they have told you lies about it, made excuses. Pauline Rymers' life has been turned upside down, and this is your opportunity to do something about it. So I was really kind of appealing to their courage of stand up to the bully and say, this is not okay. And I said, every single person on this jury has encoded on their DNA the same thing that Pauline has, which is you have the ability to be a hero. And you can do it today. You can do it not just for my clients, but for your community. You can put an end to this. And you have to do it with your verdict. You have to vote with your verdict to tell them, no, this is not okay. While the jury was out, the judge discharged the alternates. There were 3 alternate jurors. And, in Texas, you can talk to the alternates. And the alternates all said, we're with the plaintiff. And it's always awkward. You're interviewing them in front of the defense lawyers. The defense lawyers left after they told us what their liability verdict would have been. They didn't stick around for the damages. 2 of the 3 said, we'd have given you your ask. And 1 of the 3 said, we would have awarded more money than your ask. So I started thinking about it, and I said, I really need to send a new demand letter. And so Wes Black and I worked on an updated, Wes is our appellate lawyer, an updated demand. And we sent that, and that really crept in and got some thought processes going from the other side. They approached us about whether we would entertain a high-low agreement, and we negotiated that pretty quickly. And jury comes back with the verdict, and the bailiff grabs me and says, "We have a verdict," and CPS's lawyer immediately says, "We'll accept your high-low."
Live from KSAT 12.
Today, a jury finding that CPS Energy was liable for the blast that resulted from a natural gas leak.
The jury awarded Robert Rymers and his mother a total of $109.5 million. Their attorneys hope this decision sends a message to CPS Energy.
It was a really rewarding moment for us. I embraced my partners.
I've never been more impressed with a group of lawyers that I've ever worked with on either side of any case, and I've worked with a lot. The group of trial lawyers that we have here are second to none.
Everyone was supporting everyone. I don't ever remember working with a team like this at any other point in my brief legal career that was as cohesive and as coordinated as we were in the courtroom.
One of the great things about this trial is this was an exceptional team effort. I do these all over the country, month after month after month, and the team effort that was involved in this one was just incredible, just incredible.
Knowing that they won the case for my mom and my brother, and that CPS had to, suffer the consequences. Hopefully this really did make things better, that they're actually going to be held liable for their equipment.
I hope CPS learned some lessons. You don't have the ability to maintain your own gas system outside of what's past the meter, and I don't either. And the industry needs to understand the risks, learn lessons, and make changes. And I hope we did make that happen here.
And hopefully this doesn't happen again to anybody.